Have you dealt with shame from others? Maybe to the point where you feel a sense of lingering inadequacy and self-disappointment? It's easy for shame to turn toxic. The amount of self-esteem, self-love, and personal power it robs you from is immense. Whether you've dealt with high amounts of shame from your parents, friends, romantic partners, siblings, or strangers, this video will shine a light on handling toxic shame directly. Let's create a newer, healthier you. Toxic shame, a topic a lot of people probably have first-hand understanding of because they either deal with it currently or they've dealt with it in the past. And in this video, I want to shine a light on toxic shame and ways in which we can navigate toxic shame, and probably some things you are missing when it comes to your understanding of toxic shame. There's a lot of misconceptions around this topic, and some people's understanding of it isn't in-depth enough to the point where they can find remedies for it. So I do want to shine a clear light on toxic shame to illuminate just how multifaceted this topic can really get. This is kind of going to be a piggyback off my video on toxic guilt. There'll be some subtle similarities, but as you'll find out in this video, and as you may know already, shame and guilt are not the same thing. There are some differences. So for that reason, let's get into defining toxic shame, and then we'll talk about some subtle similarities between that and guilt. At the end of this video, we'll also cover ways to handle and deal with toxic shame. Firstly, shame is a painful feeling that something is fundamentally wrong with you from an identity level. You feel a strong sense of shortcoming, of being small, of being not worthy from an identity standpoint. And this differs from guilt, where you have a negative feeling towards a thing that you did, an action you took. Now, where shame and guilt kind of come together is the fact that if you feel guilty about your actions through some time, it'll start to form a negative self-identity you have about yourself. Now, shame and guilt aren't inherently bad feelings or traits. There's a lot of times people label things as bad. They're uncomfortable. They're not fun to feel. But from a standpoint of us staying in line with our integrity and our judgment, they can be very useful. If you feel guilty about something you've done, it could be an opportunity for you to course correct. If you feel shame about how you've been behaving in the past year, it can help you course correct. Where shame and guilt become toxic is when it's this chronic feeling of everything you do is bad, or you just existing is a bad thing from an identity level. This is where it becomes toxic and non-healthy. So healthy shame and guilt doesn't typically last too long. Like, you may feel guilty for a couple hours or a day, or you may feel shame for a couple hours or in a day, and then it'll dissipate. It's a learning lesson and you move forward. Where it becomes toxic is when it's chronic, it's constant, it's all around and encompassing. And this is where people start to have this negative self-image, negative self-talk, and then they create maladaptive coping mechanisms to deal with how they view themselves. So guilt targets a person's specific actions, but shame is more tied to the identity. When either are toxic, they both become prolonged. So you can see how it affects your sense of self-worth, and it affects your self-esteem. And what do you know about if you have very low self-esteem and low self-worth? Well, you're not going to feel like you're worthy of anything. And it becomes this perpetuating cycle of, you not treating yourself the best. Also, it causes other people to not treat you well, because people ping off of you and learn how to treat you from you. So in this video, we want to really demystify ways to keep a very strong, healthy self-image long-term, so that you not only relate to yourself well, you have a great relationship with yourself, but you teach people how to treat you well. You don't attract people that are toxic. So there are numerous causes of toxic shame. I'm going to read through a long list, and these are going to be pretty eye-opening, possibly relatable for you, and we'll break down each. So firstly, what causes toxic shame is disappointment or a disapproval about who you are. It's not necessarily about your specific actions, it's just you fundamentally. Like, you've somehow come to the conclusion that there's something wrong with you. And this leads to feelings of inadequacy and feelings of unworthiness as a whole. A lot of times, we could come to this conclusion from
ourselves and how we speak to ourselves, but a lot of times it can trace back to childhood and how people, when we were younger, spoke to us, parents, siblings, friends. That can really shape us. And if you are someone that is a parent or you're someone that's an older sibling and such, you want to really be careful about how you label children and how you label the young people you look after, because it can really solidify in their minds what you label them as. Like when I was younger, my older brother took good responsibility about how he communicated with me, and it was pretty cool. Like I remember one time he told me that I did something stupid, like what you did was stupid. And when I heard that, I interpreted it as he was calling me stupid. But he said, no, what you did was stupid, not you're stupid. And that right there was like the first time where it clicked for me that just because you make a mistake or you do something bad doesn't necessarily mean there's something like you're fundamentally dumb. It just means that it's a learning lesson, it's something to grow from. The action is something that needs to be corrected, not necessarily you at your core. That's when I started seeing nuances in people. It wasn't this black or white thing where, okay, if you do something stupid, that means you're stupid. No, it just means that the action you did was stupid. But if you take an older sibling or a caregiver or a parent that doesn't care about their communication in that way, and they just say you're stupid for making a mistake, that's something the child can internalize, and it has an emotional impact on the child. How do you think they'll start treating mistakes? Anytime they make a mistake, they'll beat themselves up for it. They may even not go for things that they want to go for because they don't want to make mistakes, because they don't want to keep reinforcing or keep bringing up the fact that they are what they were labeled as when they were younger, which is stupid, quote unquote. And then you have topics like imposter syndrome. Why do people feel imposter syndrome? They were berated for making mistakes. If they try this thing that they want to do and they make a mistake at it, they'll feel like they'll be berated. That inner child is still in there, worried about the consequences. Even if it's something that, hey, like no one's really judging them for it, it's still there. Isn't that interesting? We're really just grown children at the end of the day. So a lot of caregivers, parents, older siblings, maybe they don't take responsibility for their communication oftentimes. If you're speaking to a child, you have to be careful about that. Other causes of toxic shame are abuse, neglect, of course. If if your caregivers were abusive or they were just emotionally neglectful, they didn't really meet your needs from an emotional standpoint. You could feel like it's your fault for that, and feel like something is wrong with you from an identity standpoint, and you have toxic shame around that. Other things is of course trauma, trauma maybe around verbal trauma, being verbally attacked or physically attacked as well, physical trauma, all creating really emotional impacts on people. Self-blame for situations out of your control. This is very common. In the past, if something was out of your control, but you blame yourself for it, you may feel toxic guilt for it, over responsibility, but as that stays on, it becomes shame. And a good example is a child that is blaming themselves for the divorce of their parents. Like their parents could have had problems in their marriage before the child was even born. Maybe these parents literally only got married because they felt like it was the right thing to do. Like let's say in their religion, they were supposed to get married. So they feel like it's the right thing to do, even though they're not fit for each other. And then they bring a child into the world. And then 6 years into their marriage, they decide to divorce. Well, the child starts to feel like they're divorcing because of the child. They're separating because of the child. The child then starts to form this identity of, I'm the cause of this separation. I'm the cause of things not going right and such. That's how an example of how toxic guilt around something can lead to that shame. Next is parental displacement. So displacement is an ego defense mechanism where we take our frustrations or our feelings about one situation and we place it on a different situation. So for parental displacement, let's say that a child's father really dislikes a particular family member. Let's say he dislikes his brother-in-law. And every time he runs into his brother-in-law, he just feels awful. Well, whenever he gets home, he's in that awful mood, and he transfers that energy or that annoyance of his brother-in-law onto his child. Thus, he's displacing those emotions. He's projecting those. He's projecting that hate onto the child, and the child starts to internalize that defense mechanism that their father is using on them. And their father may not even realize this. In fact, maybe putting his frustration out on his brother-in-law has more consequences compared to his child. That's why he does that. Thus, parental displacement can create a sense of shame onto the child because the father doesn't know how to process his own emotions around a separate situation. Next, mental health issues, of course, those more susceptible to depression and anxiety, and those that are higher in neuroticism. And then bullying and rejection can also lead to toxic shame. Another one, this is big, and I think some of you can relate to this. Families that seem conditionally loving, so only loving you based off certain conditions or certain things you do. Now, in my video on manipulation, I did say that it can seem like that on the surface sometimes, where parents only like you for the things you do, but that's not always the case. Sometimes it's just their way of wanting you to succeed and do well, but they do love you for who you are. Like if you were to do a thought experiment where you were to disappear for a month, they would care. So it just goes to show you it's not about just what you do. It's just that it seems like that on the surface. But there are parents out there definitely that only conditionally love their children, and that can really lead to a sense of shame. A sense of, hey, if I stop performing at this sport, or I stop getting good grades, or I stop doing this and that, I'm going to lose a sense of love. So it's like I need to be a doer instead of a beer. And it's a sense of shame about who you are. You just focus on doing, and appeasing your parents and such. Another cause of toxic shame is parents that have toxic shame themselves. Parents that perpetuate the cycle. So they have inner shame and they cast it onto the child. They believe their child should feel shameful just as they feel shameful. It's a projection of shame. This parent may have felt shame growing up and they're repeating a pattern that they're used to. There's also an idea that victims of shame or victims of things tend to become abusers sometimes. This is a way of often processing the given situation that they've gone through. Like, let's say someone that was a victim of physical abuse as a child, they may become a physical abuser as a parent. So that's an example of them repeating a pattern that they're used to. Sometimes victims of abusers become abusers themselves because it creates a sense of power that they didn't have at the time, right? So at the time when they were younger, they didn't have any power and they were abused, and they subconsciously become abusers to regain back that power that was taken away from them. I think Drake Bell is a great example of this. If you look at his story, it shines a perfect light on how his abuse turned into him becoming an abuser himself and such. When someone feels weak at a certain time, strength becomes a shadow aspect they're kind of aiming to have back. And if they don't integrate it in a healthy way, they start embodying it in a very unhealthy, destructive, and dark way. It's about integrating it, but in a healthy manner. Those that have been abused sometimes and that become abusers themselves integrate strength in a very unconscious and unhealthy way. I really recommend this movie called Lola. It's amazing and fantastic. In the movie, if you watch it, the mom in the movie is a perfect example of someone that has internalized shame and that projects it onto her child. And I'm not going to try to give too many spoilers because I do recommend this movie a lot. It's such a great psychological thriller, and it's dark, by the way. So disclaimer, understand it is dark. In the movie, Lola essentially tells her mom that if she has a child, she would never be like her because her mom is very toxic. And her mom says something along the lines of, oh, well, I'm a lot better than my mom, and she was awful, and I'm a great mother, saying her own mother was worse. In the movie, Lola's mother shows so many traits of malignant narcissism. It's not even funny. And to the point where she thinks that she raised Lola very well. She's literally trying to compare it to how she was raised by her own mother. And it gets to the point where Lola's mother, can't see where she falls short and blames Lola for literally everything. She even blames Lola for an incident that happens with a family member in the movie, even though Lola literally had nothing to do with that situation. So I highly recommend the movie Lola. I think it's on Netflix. I don't know, but definitely recommend it. It shines a really good light on toxic shame. And in the movie, you can also see how Lola's experiences shape her, and you could literally see the level of toxic shame she holds within, to a point where she copes with this shame in very unhealthy ways, drug abuse, and such. Quote, as a result of consistent negative feedback from parents, teachers, and other adults, kids can start to believe that their worth is dependent on external variables. As such, They question their value and turn to maladaptive coping behaviors to deal with internalized shame. And these coping behaviors can even lead to additional shame around, oh wow, I can't believe I'm doing this. And it becomes a downward spiral. So a coping behavior that's supposed to make the person feel good ends up being something that makes their sense of shame even worse. So you see this cycle of toxic shame being perpetuated across generation to generation. And it really takes someone to break that cycle by working on themselves and identifying the shortcomings of their parents and such, and why their parents were the way that they were. And this is why I love the work that I do, is because I can help people shine that light to really break that cycle of toxicity in the family. That way, when they have kids and such, it's not the same thing. The same things don't occur. Also, it helps with just how they move through the world in general. Someone with less toxic shame is going to have more confidence and self-worth to go after their goals and make a difference in the world. Also, they're going to treat their friends better and their romantic partners better because they don't feel so low within. So that's what I strive to do with my work. It's giving thousands upon thousands of people that sense of understanding, that sense of, this is the thing I need to work on, that I picked up either consciously or subconsciously from someone that didn't know how to deal with themselves. Thus, I need to learn, I need to take responsibility, even though it's not my fault. I need to take responsibility so that I can take my life in the direction I want. Shame also comes from good and evil projection. A lot of times when you look at ideologies, maybe religious ideologies, this ideology may say people that do this or behave like this are bad and evil. And then we that don't do that or do this instead are the good people. And a lot of times the shame that they say is evil, the things they say that is evil, is often related to human nature, or it's related to a human biological drive that is very extremely natural to the given person, but they feel the shame about doing that. So it's the good and bad things that lead to shame. And thus when you say, okay, identify as this good thing here, you create a shadow out of the thing you label as bad, as I don't want to do that. And if you find yourself gravitating towards it and it's actually something that's more natural, you're going to feel shame around it. And this is where things like religious trauma come from. Now, if you're ever shamed, understand that there's a difference between getting shamed and feeling shamed. For this, refer to my video on how society programs you praise, shame, and guilt. In that video, I mentioned that if my friends and I go in your neighborhood and start hitting mailboxes with bats, and you catch up to us and you say, hey, why'd you hit my mailbox down or whatever, and you start shaming me, I can have the mindset of not feeling shame. Like, I can have a mindset that doesn't allow me to feel shame. So just because someone gets shamed doesn't necessarily mean they feel shame. I do want to mention that, throw that in there. So just because you get shamed, it doesn't mean you need to fall in the frame of feeling shame. A lot of times, the common phrase of shame is shame on you. Like, let's say a parental figure says shame on you. Doesn't mean you need to feel that. Or you should feel shameful. Like, no, you shouldn't. That's called imposition. It's they're imposing a frame or an emotion onto you that may or may not even be your own. So keep that in mind. And lastly, rumination of thoughts. So if you are perpetuating thoughts in your mind, ruminating over them, that can lead to shame. If you're ruminating over things about your character that were said, that can lead to feelings of shame. For instance, if you're still stuck on what someone from high school said about you, or someone from college, or whatever, and you keep thinking about that and taking that seriously and tying emotion onto it, it can lead to feelings of shame. Now let's talk about the effects of shame in a given person. When someone experiences this given shame, what happens to them? Internally, maybe also externally as well. Well, the obvious one is they internalize the given shame. And here's a quote on that. Quote, when you are continuously exposed to negative messages about yourself as a person, i.e., you're lazy, you're stupid, etc., the natural response is to internalize this information. Buying into these harmful messages can lead to emotional distress, anger, depression, anxiety, etc. Unhealthy perfectionism, avoidance, or withdrawal from others, and harmful coping strategies, self-harm, disordered eating, substance abuse, etc. So those are some very clear effects. The person copes with this negative self-image using negative coping strategies. That ends up, like I mentioned, making them feel worse because, well, those negative coping strategies, they don't feel good doing it. There's possibly a stigma around those negative coping strategies, etc., etc. And going back to about rumination, I want to expand more on the effects of rumination on the person. So you could ruminate about a shame long term in your mind. You're ruminating over it in a way where you're arguing against it. You're in your mind in a mental argument with the person in your mind, saying to yourself, "Well, I should have said this to them," whatever. There's that, but there's also the person's voice that sits in your mind. They become an imaginary audience. Their voice becomes internalized when you're doing actions. Let's say they're not even present anymore in your life. Maybe you cut them off, or maybe you don't live near them anymore. This given person that caused a lot of shame within you, well, their voice lives in your mind. So when you're going about in your life, you start to hear their voice judging you, critiquing you, because you've internalized them. In my video on ego defense mechanisms, I referred to this. It's called introjection. And also, I refer to this in my imaginary audience video. You start to interject them into your reality, even though they're not present. And what happens is they start to still affect your life, even though they're long gone. They've left such an imprint on your mind that even when they're not around, they're affecting you. So that's a huge thing when it comes to rumination. It's not just rumination of the situation. It's rumination over their judgment, their opinion, their statement. Thus, you feel like you need to behave in a certain way so that you don't feel this given judgment happening. And why we call introjection an ego defense mechanism is because this inner voice keeps you at the ego of shame, the identity of shame. To break through this, we have to break through that ego defense mechanism. To break into a new identity, we have to stop that habit of interjecting them and having their judgments just speaking out in our mind. This is so important because your inner monologue programs your subconscious mind. The words you say to yourself programs you. With repetition and emotion tied together, the subconscious starts to believe that. If you've behaved in line with how your parents labeled you, maybe negatively, or an old friend has labeled you negatively, oftentimes it's not just that situation, it's the rumination of programming yourself with those toxic words over and over and over again and tying the negative emotions to it. Thus, your mind and body taking it more seriously and affecting your actions, the way you think, your reality, etc. Shame also creates shadows, as mentioned, of good and bad. You become more fragmented. You reject parts of you that are unaccepted by society or family, etc. And you only connect to things that are accepted by the society. But when we talk about shadow work, we talk about integrating ourselves into wholeness, embracing all parts of ourselves so that we feel more whole. We feel more versatile. We feel more complete. With shame, you start to make shadow aspects out of these different parts of yourself. You may demonize, for example, sexuality. You may demonize free time because maybe your parents were really strict with time, with you always studying indoors or doing this, doing that. So you create a shadow out of leisure time. You may create a shadow out of maybe things like creativity because you're told, hey, get into science, get into mathematics, and that creative stuff, forget about it. But we don't have to throw things out completely. We can integrate all things in healthy manners, in well-adjusted ways. See, that's the problem with humans. Humans love to label things good or bad, black or white. They love to box people in into one thing. Like, oh, this person's this way. This person's this way. This person's a basketball player. This person's a lawyer. This person's a surfer. So stay in your box. This is known as splitting. Splitting is only seeing like black or white, categorical thinking. It's a defense mechanism. It's this person's Republican. This person's Democrat. This person is a nerd. This person gets all the girls. This is the categories we see. And if you're someone that's into self-development, you start to you're breaking through these given categories, these compartmentalized ways in which you're viewed. Other effects of toxic shame are coming into interactions from below. You interact with people from the standpoint of being lower value or very lower status compared to them, no matter who you're really talking to. And people can pick up on that, and they're confused. They're like, why is this person so, why is this person showing that type of body language? Why does this person seem so nervous? It's because of that internalized shame that's going on. Next, you try to become lovable and seek it from others overtly or covertly. And you could maybe try to manipulate to get that love. So I made a video on manipulation. I talk about how people manipulate for different reasons. They may not even know it. Someone may manipulate to get love from someone else because they feel so much shame within that they need to seek out love externally all the time. And it becomes this thing that's fleeting, and they have to, well, get it again, get it again, get it again. And sometimes it's the other way around, where they're not manipulating for love, they're just looking for love a lot. And unfortunately, they get taken advantage of by narcissistic individuals or people with nefarious agendas that want to just, take advantage of the person being looking for love. When I say love, I don't just mean romantic love. I mean a sense of validation, camaraderie, appreciation, acts of service, physical touch, etc. And the problem with this is that you constantly need more and more and more love from other people. You constantly need to fill your empty cup with other people's love instead of having your cup almost mostly full with your own love and having just some space for love from other people. That is a more healthy way of viewing it than an empty cup that needs complete love from others. The person may always also try to always measure up. So that's a big thing. Also, if you deal with toxic shame, it may be difficult for you to acknowledge your uncomfortable emotions. Maybe someone has in the past has labeled your emotions as invalid or has conditioned you to believe that your emotions are shameful. So identifying that you feel this shame is even shameful in and of itself. So you try not to even, it's really hard for your mind to even get to the point where it acknowledges the fact that it feels toxic shame because of the stigma around it. It's kind of like if someone dealing with toxic shame were to go to a therapist and they were to tell their narcissistic parent about going to therapy, and the parent's like, why are you going to therapy? There's nothing wrong with you. That's for crazy people and such and such and such. And here's some last couple things. You don't trust yourself to internalize that you can love yourself. Because of so much shame, it's hard for you to internalize that you can love yourself. Shame can become an identity of safety and familiarity. So getting into this territory where you love yourself unconditionally, that can be very uncomfortable and weird. There's so many people where I hop on calls with them and I tell them, hey, you can give yourself love and credit. You can give yourself validation. You can give yourself a pat on the back. You can realize your strengths. And to them, that's such a foreign thing. That's such a foreign thing because they're so used to it only coming from the outside or it not coming at all. That validation not occurring at all. So that's a big thing there. Shame can be tied to lifestyle and friends, right? If you make an identity, you may get friends that feel shame within themselves. And you may build a lifestyle or get into a relationship that is around shame. Thus, you working on your shame and you developing self-love and all of this may threaten your friend group, the relationship you're in, even the job you may work at. You know how many people are so traumatized by shame that it leads to them doing certain types of jobs, right? Certain types of jobs that they gravitate towards. So the lifestyle component is a big thing, and it becomes something you're so used to the point where if you work on this thing within you and you work on those traumas and you're now a different person, well, you may lose out on the people you're familiar with, even if they're not the best people for you. In fact, that's why a lot of people don't change. It's because they're like, oh, what would this mean about my life? What do I have to get rid of now? That's scary. That's the unknown that people fear. So that's what also leads to subconscious resistance. If you're someone that doesn't necessarily deal with shame particularly, but you find yourself stuck a lot in life. And before I get into the solutions, the last effect of toxic shame is a perpetual family cycle where it's passed on from generation to generation. Now let's get into solutions. First, explore the origins of your negative self-talk. Dissect the introjection. Identify where is this negative speak coming from? Who told you this in the past? When you identify whose voice this was, maybe it was your mom, your dad, your siblings, your past friends, identify where they were coming from. And that's kind of the next thing. So you want to reframe the self-talk. You want to look at a different vantage point of the self-talk, of the labeling that's going on. So why was the person telling you this? You want to think about that. Did they hurt themselves in life? Are they someone that's feeling shame within? Are they someone that has been abused themselves? Are they someone that is used to toxicity? Did they deal with shame? Think about that. Did they deal with any mental disorders, any traumas of their own? You want to broaden out your perspective when you're reframing, because a lot of times when we're younger, we internalize shame and we don't look at a broader perspective of where it's coming from. We don't look at the person's projections. We don't look at their background enough. We don't look at our family history. So these are important things we have to keep in mind so that we don't just internalize someone's projections, someone's fears. Next, be around people that reinforce the opposite identity. Be around people that reinforce love, that reinforce goodness, that reinforce your value. So create a new environment and get away from those that perpetuates the toxic shame. You have to set boundaries with people or limit your time with people that are constantly shaming you. You want to develop new relationships and create new blank slates with people that will treat you better. It starts with you. You have to do the inner work of loving yourself, of seeing your value, building that self-love. And you can do this through meditation. You can do this through affirmations, binaural beat audios with affirmations on them of self-love that reprograms your subconscious mind. This is important stuff. And when you do this, you'll start to realize that you behave differently, you speak differently, and people pick up on that. And people will start to follow along and treat you along those lines for the most part, not everybody. And the people that don't, just don't be around them. And then this is new friends, new people you know that reinforces a new identity. Your environment is now helping you overcome this past limitation. You're doing it within, but also you're forming an environment for that. So you're getting into a relationship maybe with a healthy partner. And in that process, you're making sure you're not sabotaging it and you're not looking for toxicity. You're making new friends, healthy friends, acquaintances, whatever is needed to create an environment of people, a tribe that reinforces that you are lovable, that you are of value. Here's a quote by Alex Hormozi. I absolutely love it. Quote, "The life you want is on the other side of a few difficult conversations, and you're living the life you hate right now because you're afraid to have them." So you're afraid to say, this person's got to go, and tell them that, hey, I can no longer be around you. You may be afraid of that. There's difficult conversations we need to have in order to save ourselves from toxic shame long term. Next, build self-compassion, unconditional love, and patience. Say mantras to yourself around self-compassion. I am compassionate for myself. I embody self-compassion. Affirmations as well around that. And remember to do so. Like literally set a timer on your phone, like every hour, 2 hours, to literally stop what you're doing and say that to yourself. No matter how weird it feels initially, keep doing it until it's normal and it feels good. Also, watch yourself talk immediately after mistakes or wrongdoings, etc. Big or small. The problem with people with toxic shame is that they use toxic words against themselves, and that's what keeps them in that identity. Going back to introjection, they also take seriously the voice of people from the past that has led to their shame. So we have to disidentify with those voices, and we have to stop the negative words we say to ourselves. Even self-deprecating humor. I hate self-deprecating humor. It doesn't make sense to me. Like, that is toxic. It's not good for you. I'm such this. Oh, here I go again. Like, that stuff is not even funny. It's the ego's way of slipping those toxic words in, disguised as a joke. Also, judge yourself less. Work on judging things less in life, judging yourself less. That's going to help you really just be when it comes to mistakes, or just comes to just you living your life. Like, just stop judging so much. Catch the times in which you're judging a lot. Judging yourself especially, but just things in general. Also, acceptance. So accepting what is. When you accept what is, it does not mean that you are not taking measures to change what is, but you are accepting it for what it is. You're no longer in resistance to it. So you're no longer in resistance of, I can't believe they said that in the past. I can't believe I dealt with this trauma. I can't believe I dealt with this abuse from this person. Accept that. Accept that it happened completely, 100%. And then when you accept something 100%, watch how the mind calms down. And from there, you take measures to deal with its ramifications. You deal with its end result. So you work on your traumas, but you accept the fact that this trauma has existed. You acknowledge those emotions. You acknowledge the fact that it's real. This is so important. Acceptance. Acceptance from where you are right now. Some people may have shame around having toxic shame. No, just accept it and then work on yourself. Next, notice the small progress and stay consistent. If you're noticing, let's say a month, 2 months, 6 months passes by, and you notice that you're really getting better, like you're really feeling better about yourself, you're really healing from the past, stay consistent. Use that as evidence that you are growing. Use that as a case study of, I'm progressing in the right way. Let me keep doing this. So notice those small progressions. Maybe your posture is better this time. Maybe you're able to talk to strangers now. Maybe you're able to even start a business that you were scared of starting due to internalized shame of the past, but now you're already starting it. So notice those progressions that go on. It'll really give you confidence to keep going. Next, go more meta with your family lineage or people of the past. I kind of alluded to this to the first point, but this relates more to family. Parents and their parents, think about that. Think about what the circumstances were. Think about what people were dealing with, what maybe what mental things were occurring. For instance, if you go back in time and you realize that, hey, your father was in Vietnam, for example, and that war really affected him, you can start putting into perspective maybe his potential addictions and the things he dealt with that led to him shaming you. Maybe potential post-traumatic stress disorder as the result of war that has led to him maybe not adjusting to society in the best way. That's just an example. So look at your family lineage. Look at who raised who and how that person was internally. Lastly, you are not the mind. The mind is not you. You are just an observer in the body, experiencing thoughts, and you are not the thoughts. You aren't even the emotions. You're just consciousness. And the more you can internalize this, the better you can watch thoughts come and go, not identify with them, and just be.